So how are the chicks?
Okay, take down your screen sharing.
Oh,
Me, us.
oh
Yeah,
yeah.
end your screen sharing.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you weren't seeing us, huh?
Right,
Not very big.
now we can see everybody.
Should we wait a minute or, oh no, it's just 1 PM, so let's wait a little bit, see if anybody else joins.
Yeah. And you might have some on YouTube too. Yeah.
So let me know when you.
Yeah, sir. Yeah.
Okay, welcome to the Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Durand, your host for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research and learning center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, we have had to discontinue our in-person events, and instituted these online webinars. We hope that you will donate so that we can continue to pay our local staff and will support these webinars. You can donate at our website, which is listed on your screen. Today's program, we have Ben Ptashnik and Victoria Collier, both of whom you see here. They have been reclaiming an area near San Miguel as their contribution to the solution of the world food crisis. They operate a permaculture farm near San Miguel de Allende. They'll show us around their farm and its many projects that benefit the community. So they will, after their presentation, we'll have opportunity for questions and comments. So stay tuned. And now let me give the floor to Ben and Victoria.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
So today what we'd like to do is focus in on our work that we're doing in restoring a local reservoir that that had gotten siltified over the last 40 years. It hasn't been maintained. And all of our local neighbors, who are mostly campesino family, have usually survived on animal husbandry and on small milpas, corn, beans, and squash, and home gardens, which they used to sustain themselves. They would have usually chickens, cows, goats, sheep, and the town reservoir was what they depended on to water their animals. And they would, for the last about 150 years since this reservoir was built, local farmers, local families would every day take their animals out to pasture and walk them down to the reservoir to drink water, sometimes during the day or twice during the day. Water them in the morning, take them out to pasture, then take them back to the reservoir, and then eventually take them back home. And they dependent before climate change, it depended on the monsoons that come pretty regularly. And there was also a town well that used to supply enough water, so that they could keep some animals at home, not large herds. But since the aquifer around San Miguel has depleted, the wells have been running dry every winter in the dry season. And eventually they had to do a new well, but the community couldn't afford the well. So Sapazma stepped in, but built a well for 5 communities, actually 7 communities. And each community gets a couple hours a week when they could fill up their tinacos, and a maximum of 500 gallons or 2,000 liters a week. And that's all they can have, which gives them enough to cook and wash and flush their toilets, but not much else. And so the situation was such that a lot of people had to give up their animals and give up farming, give up their home gardens, which exacerbates the need of everybody in the family to either find a job in the city or move to Querétaro or move to Mexico City or take a chance on crossing the border and working in the States to make money. And then you have the whole immigration crisis, and the political ramifications of that. Not to mention that one of the people who worked for us, never made it to the other side of the border and disappeared. And a number of people have, been caught, sent back. But generally, the situation is what we were facing in an exacerbated form when the COVID pandemic hit. And we suddenly found out that all of our neighbors, of the families of the people who worked for us, were basically in starvation mode. They had no jobs in San Miguel. A lot of them family members who worked in the restaurant and tourist industry, in the hotels, no longer had jobs. Remittances weren't coming from the United States, from people who were basically locked out of jobs in the States. And so the whole local economy was basically in a desperate situation. We had been building this 7.5 acre permaculture site as a demonstration center. We have basically, we're off grid with solar and wind power. We build with Adobe, so we have green building. We have ponds, we catch rainwater, and we've been learning how to capture enough rainwater every season to maintain ourselves, our animals, etc. We have fish ponds, we have 150 chickens, and we have cisterns, 6 cisterns and reservoirs that collect rainwater.
Because we also don't have a well, and we don't have city water or any municipal services. So we've had to learn how to capture enough water for ourselves to be self-sustaining. So we've been doing that for 10 years. And now we're able to bring that to the village, to the larger community. And that's the project that we're talking about today.
And we, because we've been building reservoirs for ourselves, or ponds essentially, we've got, last year we caught a mill finally in the big rains that we had last September. We captured about 1 million liters of water. And we would have been self-sustaining, except we were also having to feed about 60 families. During the 2 years of COVID, we grew corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, chilies, fruits, and we distributed them to the community, about 60,000 meals in all. And we had to buy water to do that, on top of the 1 million liters of water we captured. And so we decided at that point to think about the community scale reservoir that was being sort of left unused because it was no longer capturing enough water.
So now we can screen share now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to screen share now to show you what this project was like. So go down. And why don't you speak a little bit so I can sip on my tea?
Mhm. Are the
So
photos at the
it's
bottom?
Tom and Ann are on, and a couple of other people, right?
All right, sorry about that. Okay, so can everybody see this screen? Okay, so this community reservoir, which was so essential and critical for 3 different villages surrounding us, we noticed over the years that it seemed to have some water in it at the end of the rainy season, and then it would just very quickly dry out and turn into a big mud flat. And this is basically what it looked like.
And you could see the dam in the background there.
They can't see you pointing.
Oh, but you see where those trees are in the
The trees in
background?
the background, that's the dam that was built in this little valley to dam up the water that flows down the hillsides. And so, there's not too much of it that you can see at that point. And
And these are engineers from the state of Guanajuato that came, Vicky called them up, and they, a couple of weeks later, they came down to see the reservoir and give us some expert advice as to what to do. And so they basically told us what we had to do.
right. And we should say that these projects, these water restoration, reservoir restoration projects and water harvesting projects are really essential for villages existing in arid environments all around the world. It's getting drier and hotter because of climate change. And as you also know, the wells in our area are often contaminated with arsenic and other toxins. And so capturing rainwater not only is vital for community resiliency, but it also helps to restore the groundwater, the water table that we have that's being depleted through, agriculture and excessive use and development. So it's an answer to a lot of things. So when we first started to do this project, we did not know how much soil was in this reservoir.
This is let me just
Yes, go ahead.
This is what you're looking here is a quarry that we dug right next to the reservoir. It's to get the patate out, to get the hard pan out, to put on top of the old dam because it had eroded. And we needed to fix the holes. Some of them were about a meter and a half holes where the water had spilled over the top and eroded the top. And then we had to raise it back to its actual former level, which was almost 2 meters to 2.5 meters above some of the grade that currently existed. And so here we're digging this pit, which later became part of the reservoir because we dug it right next to the reservoir so they could join together. And here you see the trucks and the excavators, and go to the next shot. And here you can see the bulldozer and the truck that's unloading tepetate on top of this is the dam right here that you're looking at, and we're rebuilding it. And here you see, once we started going down slope into the front of the dam, how deep that black dirt topsoil was.
Yeah, it was
We
so much
thought-
deeper than we thought it was going to
We
be.
thought it was going to be 2 to 3 meters deep, and we'd take a week of an excavator and a couple of trucks. We wind up going almost a month. And a project that was supposed to take a week wound up taking about 25 days. And we want take a look at that cliff. You see how big it gets, and we're not done yet.
That's
going
all
down.
soil. That's a cliff of black soil. That's how much soil had filled this pond over decades. Who knows if it was ever cleaned out, maybe never was.
And this is what we wind up getting out of that pond, a mountain. That mountain's about 1,000 truckloads, 14 yards or 14 cubic meters each, full of nutrients from the thousands and thousands of animals every year that would go down to the pond and deposit a little bit of an offering. And so that this is what it finally looked like when we got all the dirt out. And at this point, we're putting tepotate up against the front of the dam in order to shore it up so it wasn't too steep. And dams have to be a nice, gentle slope in the front. And so we had to take some of the tepotate out of the pit and fill it up. And here now, finally, you're looking at a picture of the first rains.
Yeah, the rains came very late this year.
Actually, this picture is the first rain.
Yeah, we had a puddle for a long time before we got more rain. This is basically what we were looking at, was a sad puddle for a couple of months until the rains came.
And then finally a nice decent rain filled up with about 500,000 liters there. That's really deep now. It's about 10 feet deep right in front of the dam.
So the horses started to show up.
And then a good rain came in late August. And, we got about 1 million liters of water there now. And then finally, a big hurricane, Marie, passed the coast of Jalisco, and we got that big dump in September that filled up half the pond. Now, this is at half of capacity. And instead of being like 1 million liters, like it could hold maybe 1.5 million liters, that represents about 5 to 6 million liters.
So then we started the next phase of the project, which is reforestation and tree planting all around the reservoir. And Collier donated 1,000 saplings toward this project. So we've started that every weekend. For the past few Saturdays, 4 weeks, we've been doing tree planting, getting the local community out, and also folks from town who've been coming out, and everybody's working together.
Cliff was out there this past Saturday planting trees too.
Yep. Was that the last one?
Yeah, that's the last one.
Yeah.
So
and the next phase of this project after the reforestation, or perhaps during the reforestation, is to create a water distribution system for the villages, to pump water up to the village for home garden use. So not just for the livestock to come down to the reservoir, but to also use that water for the villages so people can have their gardens.
So let's just go over the project a little bit, and I can show you.
Oh, I've stopped sharing.
All right, we'll do the sharing some more in a minute. But what I wanted to say is that historically, a lot of this has to do with NAFTA, and a lot of this, and I know you folks have been working, Global Justice has been working in opposition to NAFTA and trying to mitigate some of the damage of NAFTA, but the damage actually started earlier in the 1980s, before NAFTA, when there was a debt crisis in the world, and the World Bank would step in and would say, basically, you've got to reorganize your import-export base and your debt, loads. And what happened at that point was I did some research on this, and the agriculture system around here was very dependent in the 1960s, 70s on a basic system of marketing that was similar to the Farm Extension Service in the United States. Basically, all the local farmers would get help with seed money for buying seeds and whatever, other necessities they had, small loans. There was a whole marketing system to take all the local crops and sell them, so that each farmer didn't have to deal with marketing. If they had a crop of corn, they knew where to take it, and so that all was government subsidized until in the 70s and into the 80s. And after the debt crisis, basically it got defunded, that whole marketing program. And Mexico's agriculture was reorganized around exports of fruit and vegetables as opposed to corn and beans. And so the Margaret segment, and for a while that was really good. It expanded Mexico's export trade in relation to their import of agricultural products and levelized the debt problem. But then with NAFTA, a host of corn, cheap corn started coming in, and that changed the whole equation. And then it was between the marketing system being destroyed and the corn no longer being valid, only vegetables and fruits grown here, and it is grown all around here, they were the only products that were being exported. And they represented only a small percentage of the Mexican farm economy. And so basically, there's a collapse happening, exacerbated by global climate change. And as we see it, the only solution is for rebuilding the local farm economy on a small farm basis and building resiliency for the communities. And that starts with rainwater harvesting. And some of the other work that organizations like the Rotarians are doing, where they install dry toilets in people's homes, so they're not using all their water for flushing the toilet for their 6 kids, or using, a roof rainwater catchment system next to each house. And we see topping that off. So there's a water distribution system in this village, and it comes from the well, but it's rationed. We see a secondary distribution system where we're pumping water out of the reservoir, bringing it to a holding station, a tinaco at the top of the town, and then building a irrigation, building a water distribution system to people's homes, helping them have their own rainwater catchment tinacos, which can also be fed, or secondary tinaco, which can be fed for their animals in their gardens. It's not potable necessarily.
Probably be a secondary one. Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be a secondary one. It can't be mixed with the first one,
No.
which is potable.
Yeah.
Or ostensibly potable from the well. So the idea is that we rebuild resiliency in the local community by essentially, and our plan is to put a solar system and a pumping station that works on solar, with a direct solar to DC pump, bringing the water up to the town. And I had a solar company, so I'm a solar installation. And I know it's a simple thing. We worked with Casita Linda back 15 years ago, installing a water system that was solar operated in a village on the other side of the reservoir.
So our idea here is really to make this project a model type of project that we'd like to see replicated all over the San Miguel area and beyond. So we're collaborating more and more with other NGOs and with the local and state government to, really form a coalition of people who can bring different components to this. So Collier bringing in the trees and also bringing in some help for planting the trees was the first step.
Yeah, you all know about the reservoir, the San Miguel
Oh, yeah.
Presa Allende, and the big problem they have with hyacinths, with lirios there. There's a plague happening because a bunch of hyacinths came down the Laja River into the reservoir, which has not been, which is basically filled with a lot of sewage from San Miguel. And that sewage basically created a huge burst of expansion of the lirio to the point that it's a plague covering a third of the reservoir. But we use lirios as a mulching product for trees. We have planted about 1,000 trees and magueys on our property, and we also have ponds that are full of lirios. We took lirios out of the Laja River to use as a resource. Our fish eat the roots, so we have them in the fish ponds. And when there's too many lirios in our pond, we take them out and we mulch and we compost them. And we use them for compost, and then we use them also for mulch, just putting them above a tree that we planted, so to keep the tree moist and shaded.
Yeah, so this explosion hyacinths in the presa is actually an amazing resource that we're trying to, educate and use ourselves and show people how you can use it. And using it for reforestation is perfect, because when you're planting thousands of trees, you need to just to protect them from drought, and they're very vulnerable in the very beginning. So you want to mulch them, keep the root zone wet. And these hyacinths are the perfect mulch for that, especially when they come fresh out of the water. They're 95% water. So you're putting a very heavy wet mulch down that keeps that tree protected, and you can lower your water needs initially by up to 50%. So we think it's a perfect combination of, solving an ecological crisis and creating a ecological restoration project at the same time.
All over the world, one of the best solutions for water retention and capturing rainwater is reforestation, is penetration ditches, reservoirs, swales and berms, in order to, which is what permaculture is all about. A big part of it is first retaining water so you can, regenerate water, groundwater, and regenerate being able to grow food more year round than just in the monsoon season. It also prevents erosion, because the terracing and the capturing of the water basically stops the outflow of topsoil. And so all around San Miguel, we need to do reforestation. So the lirios in the pond become an important part, because usually when they go out and just plant 1,000 trees out in an arid wasteland, 50% of them are dead by the next year. Nobody can go around and water these trees, and so they depend on the rainwater. So by putting them down in mulch, putting mulch around them, you really can create a much better retention rate for the planted seedlings. And that's what we're promoting. And at the same time, we're promoting getting the reservoirs. There are hundreds of reservoirs within 5 miles of San Miguel that are basically full of soil. You take that soil out, you mix it with lirios from the Presa Allende, and you could reforest, create a green belt around San Miguel, make it really a much more sustainable ecosystem surrounding the city, which retains more water, builds up the aquifer again instead of it being continuously depleted. So that's basically the holistic way of approaching this.
It's a process of ecological restoration, and it's a plan for the long-term sustainability of San Miguel and the long-term water sustainability, because we all know water's it's already a crisis. It's going to get worse. So we really strongly believe these kinds of projects are an answer to that.
And that's what we're doing right now. We're very happy to be working now with Collier, which is now known as
It's got a new name.
It's the Directory of Environment, Directoria de Medio Ambiente y Sustentabilidad. So we're working with them. They've donated 1,000 trees. They've paid to have truckloads of lirios taken out of the pond. We paid for the transportation here to our local area. And we've basically been able to, we've probably got enough trees. We can plant 1,000 trees and maybe 5,000 more with the dirt we have. And so
All of this is on our website if you want to learn more, ticunsanmiguel.mx. Yeah.
And I'm going to do some screen sharing here again and show you.
Just do
Share. And we'll go to the top of this.
Sorry. Okay.
And here you have our website.
Yeah, Ticun San Miguel.
ticunsanmiguel.mx. Ticun is spelled Tikkun. Ticun means to repair. It's from the concept of tikkun olam, which in Hebrew means to repair the earth, which is a Kabbalist sort of spiritual vein that says our work on this planet is to continue and repair God's work. And repairing the planet is sort of what our theme is here at Tikkun, through water harvesting, reforestation, food security projects, and green building and energy, renewable energy, and essentially,
Don't scroll.
essentially we've got about maybe 8 years now of planting trees. When we first came out here, we didn't have any money, but we've been planting trees poco poco. In the first years, we were mostly building our house, and then in our solar systems and the first pond, and poco poco, every year we planted more trees and more ponds and more trees and more farming, and until COVID came along and we went into full-scale farming.
Okay.
I think that pretty much covers it. If you have any questions, why don't we go into a dialogue, question and answer mode?
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Ben and Victoria. I should mention,
Fighting it.
by the way, that Ben was a former Vermont state senator. And he and Victoria both been involved in voter protection. So they've gotten involved in a number of projects and have reinvented themselves here in Mexico as farmers and reclaimers of the land. So
Well, that's been our work as well for most of our lives, both democracy and environmental work, because I think that we're probably both most passionate about the environmental work, but we realize that without a functional democratic process, we tend to get bad outcomes when it comes to the environment. So.
And Victoria worked on a permaculture farm and did home gardens in Taos, New Mexico for 10 years.
Yeah.
And was an environmental activist and political activist before that. And I actually got my undergraduate degree in political science, and that's sort of how I became a senator. But before I did that, I also did my postgraduate work in ecology and natural resource management at Antioch, New England, in their ecology program. And I was the head of the Organic Farmers Association in New England, the New England Organic Farmers Association. And I worked for years with the food co-op movements, building the organic food industry and an alternative local, growing industry to replace bringing truckloads of vegetables from California to Vermont. And so I worked for many years, and I was on the Ag Committee in the Senate and on the Economic Development Committee. So our backgrounds both lend us to doing this kind of work. So we didn't really reinvent ourselves. We just did the political work in the States so we could do this. All of our salaries went into planting trees, just so you know, Cliff. And the solar business was one interlude where you and I first met. I started a solar company and pioneered the solar energy industry here in Mexico for a while, built about 500 systems.
Are there any questions about this project?
well, if there are any comments or questions from our YouTube viewers, you can email us at global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. And I'll pass your question on to those of us in the Zoom room. But right now I see that We have a question from Ann Geyer and then from Mark Ginsberg. So,
Okay. All right. Do you want me to start then, Cliff?
sure.
I was gonna ask, thanks very much, Ben and Vicky. This is just a great, wonderful. And I'm excited that it's gonna be on YouTube so I can have my family watch it later, my family in the US. But I wanted to see if you could, you mentioned it earlier in this talk and in the previous conversation, how you sort of set up a food bank during the pandemic for the local community. And I don't know if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about that.
Oh,
Okay.
we have a small farm and garden here on the property, and then when COVID started, it just became obvious that we needed to help the community. So we pretty rapidly expanded our production and created a community farm. And in 2020 and 2021, we did this farm. And ended up providing, we estimate, around 60,000 meals to about 60 families. And that included a lot of single moms who were struggling, a lot of elderly people who were struggling, really very vulnerable people in our community. We had a lot of COVID come through the villages here. People were dying. So it was a real crisis. And we were really, that I think that's kind of the essence of permaculture is, I mean, people may not be familiar with permaculture, but that is what we're doing here. And it's a sustainable design system that really takes into account not just your own farm and your own family, but your larger community.
And your larger environment, your regional environment, your local environment.
So it just made sense. It makes sense for any permaculture farm to be able to be a support during times of crisis, and that's what we did.
If I may.
Yeah.
So we had several members of our work crew got sick with COVID. One still has long-term COVID. One who had worked with me for like 15 years. One of our workers lost his wife. 6 of the people who are in our work crew lost their grandfather or their father. And so we were very concerned. We were very concerned about the local community. So we had 5 acres that we hadn't yet put into production, that we were just putting cover crops, or so we wind up with 5 acres of corn, beans, and squash, which is the 3 sisters.
Yeah.
Corn takes nitrogen out, beans put nitrogen back in, squash has big leaves to cover the ground and keep the water from evaporating. And we basically put in a drip irrigation system in about 2 acres. So in case the drought got too bad, we could water. And we couldn't cook people, but we could go every Tuesday to the local schools, the 2 local schools in the villages, with a truck full of bags, and we just gave them enough corn, beans, and squash to and also onions and carrots and
Oh yeah, lots of vegetables.
Lots
It
of
wasn't
vegetables.
just corn, beans, and squash. We had all different kinds: tomatoes and lettuce and cilantro and
chilies and
calabasas and everything that they
and
like.
and so we would basically give them a couple of bags of food to last them the week, sort of like a CSA, a community supported agriculture, would do. And so we didn't have to have direct contact with all these people. We just, everybody wore masks. We'd give them bags, we'd spray the bags, and everything would be cool.
Yeah.
And then they'd come back the next week and pick up another and return the bags. We recycled the bags. And
Good.
Yeah, and we may do that again. We may just do that as a regular ongoing project. This year, we focused in on the reservoir project and didn't have the resources to do everything. But I'd like to have an ongoing community garden here that supports, again, like elderly community members and people who are definitely struggling. Not a huge project, but something that just gives that kind of support to the vulnerable
Yeah.
people around us.
Last year, we didn't have to buy so much water, but in the first year of the COVID, we bought about 50 truckloads of water just to keep all the crops going, and that we can't afford to do that anymore. We could do that just so long. Especially since we're now doing this full time. We stopped doing the NGO work that we were doing in the States to protect democracy after the 2020 election. Our job is basically to protect the election. And so we slowed down our activism in the States to focus on security here.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, gosh, thank you very much. If I can ask another one, I don't, Cliff, is that okay? I don't want to be.
Sure, go
hogging-
ahead.
I don't want to be hogging you guys. Maybe if you could explain a little bit that whole idea of permaculture, what it means, and kind of some examples. And I'm thinking about the grasshoppers here, or other things that, that you've used to help, beef up or,
Yeah, so briefly, I mean, permaculture is a sustainable design system. It was sort of envisioned by a couple of Australian men in the 1970s, and it since has become a worldwide movement. It has some basic principles and ethics and guidelines and different kinds of methods that are used in most places, but it's also dependent on your location, your terrain, your resources, your weather. It's very specific to where you are located. So for us, we're in a dry zone, so we practice what's generally called dry land permaculture, which is why a lot of it has to do with water harvesting systems. But
And water penetration systems.
it's a holistic, really philosophical approach to how we build and how we design our agriculture, our communities, really just everything. I mean, it can be applied to everything. And it has certain features, like basically you try not to create waste, to use all of the waste that you create as part of your resources. You try to create a closed circle of energy on your farm or in your communities where you're recycling, you're reusing. It's kind of a right use of your resources, and the idea is that you don't go into a place and sort of impose your human kind of short-sighted destructive development on it. You don't go in and say, well, let's just cut everything down and cover it with concrete
Or cover it with one monocrop.
And have these very energy intensive, ultimately unsustainable systems. Instead, you learn about it very much based on working with natural ecosystems and enhancing them, learning how to use all the different features of your ecosystems that are already there, and use them in a sustainable way so that you're hopefully in the end actually regenerating and creating more abundance for future generations rather than
Leaving nothing
for future generations, sucking all the value and all the energy out of a system and leaving it depleted, and then going oops, and leaving it for your grandchildren to figure out. So that it's trying to heal the damage we've done and create systems that can last, that can sustain over time.
Yeah.
We were going to show a short film about a project in India that we recently started monitoring, which was called the India Water Cup, where permaculture systems of water retention and penetration were introduced in India in a couple of locations where the land had been eroded. People were not able to grow anything beyond the 2 months or 3 months of the monsoon season, which would often also take more topsoil off. And then the whole village practically would have to go to Mumbai or Calcutta and work picking, recycling garbage or something in order to survive the rest of the dry season.
So you should Google this. I don't know if we're running out of time, but people should Google the India Water Cup or India Water Revolution. And there are many videos about it because it ended up being a huge contest that a Bollywood movie star billionaire funded in order to get thousands of villages involved with creating these permaculture water systems for sustainability for their villages.
Just like we're doing here.
Just like we're doing.
Reservoirs, cisterns, water penetration pits, terracing,
all
and
sorts of different
just to
methods.
slow down the water from just rushing off the land,
Yeah.
retaining it long enough in pits and in reservoirs so that the local groundwater got regenerated. And then you see villages where people didn't have to leave after the monsoon season and could grow second and third crops.
And these are not complicated systems. These are not, it's just a simple matter of learning how to do this. And I think a lot of this was, a lot of indigenous communities had terracing systems and better water management systems than we've created today or that we have today. And so there's some just relearning of knowledge that we traditionally had. I mean, you can get more complicated with it, but even at the village scale and without even a lot of machinery, you can start to do these projects, and it really does transform.
In India, they did it mostly with hand labor.
Yeah.
And 3,000 villages took part in this contest called the Water Cup. It's like the America's Cup, but it's the Water Cup. And villages would be given some training, and then the whole village would come out and dig ditches, and there'd be bucket brigades of people pulling the dirt and the rocks out of the ditches and building reservoirs. And then, about, 20 villages won prizes and actually got thousands of, rupees, I guess it was. And were able to take then rent machinery and go to a higher stage of doing the project. But in the first phase, they were able to create ponds and irrigation systems and pits that collected 1.25 billion gallons of water.
Estimated.
That's estimated, right?
Amazing.
Yeah. It's simple, but it really is kind of the basis for transformation. And also just, we're really facing a future of serious crisis and even violence and war over water. And we can start mitigating that now if we put our resources into it.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 reservoirs around San Miguel that are full of dirt that could be used to reforest, And we asked about around here, and we found out that there's, within a couple of miles of here, there's a dozen reservoirs. One of them is just filled with soil and the guy's growing corn in it. Another one is turned into a garbage pit, and a third one is just sort of been left sitting for the last 10 years.
Wow.
And that's just asking about what people knew about locally right around us.
Yeah.
I talked to Collier, to the Department of, Sustainability and Environment, and they said that there's hundreds of reservoirs that could be resurrected.
Wow.
Just in the Chaco and Genio, there's a 5-hectare pond that's full of silt.
Wow.
Just as around where Landeta is, where they built the park for the new park for the city.
So if we really had a vision for San Miguel, say for the next 5 years, doing just an intensive push to, do these projects to reclaim these reservoirs, then you've got these resources of the soil you take out, the resources of all those lirios that are in the presa. I mean, it's all just there, to be done. It just needs to be organized and the resources provided to do the work, but it would lead to a huge transformation, and it would make San Miguel an eco city, basically, so that we could be put on the map for that, not just as a tourist
wedding destination.
We'll have an eco wedding destination, get married next to this restored reservoir or something.
Or on a permaculture farm.
Right.
Instead,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a vision.
That's great. And do you think there's any chance, or what kinds of steps could be taken to push that vision forward, or what do you think?
Well, the department, we brought the Department of Ecology here. I met with the director and the subdirector, who really, the subdirector does all the work. The director is just a political appointment. And the subdirector is, bringing 45 students here in 3 weeks to camp out and learn about permaculture.
Oh, that's
He's
great.
also a professor at UNAM. And he's told me that he donated 1,000 trees because he wants us to succeed in this model project. He's already joined us. So we've got the Department of Ecology, or the
It's just say.
just say ecology. It
It's too
confuses me to go with the other name. But basically, we've got them on our side,
Oh,
you know.
that's-
And then the Rotarians have come out, and the UUs have come out. And now, representing the Global Justice Center, Cliff has come out and planted trees. And the Presbyterian Church has come out, the San Miguel Community Church.
Yeah.
And everybody from the village has come out, and everybody's excited. And we're building a project from the ground up. And if we could do a good job of this, it can be duplicated. And so
I think
that's
you have to show what can be done, and
Yeah.
that's what we're doing. And then people can get excited. Even, the village, the local people here are constantly down there now at the reservoir, just hanging out, walking their dogs around. It's a new
Yeah.
community center for gathering, which actually they did not have before. There really wasn't
they
anywhere.
used to meet. They don't even have a plaza in this village. They had meetings for the town water committee or the town school committee in the middle of the street. The main
Oh, my
drag.
gosh.
So now we're trying to convince them to build a kiosk, and
Yeah. By the
and-
reservoir.
by the reservoir, and we're gonna
Oh,
put
they're
in.
going to donate a playground, though.
Oh yeah, the city's
Oh,
donating a
that's really
playground and a soccer field.
Yeah.
So that's happening.
So so now we're going to have a playground and a soccer field and a picnic ground all around this reservoir that's being reforested. So it's like a community ecological project that.
And a community organizing kind of
Yeah,
project.
yeah.
So actually, Collier just came out this past week to do a show for the kids, for the village kids, about animals.
It was Animal Day on
It was
Friday.
Animal Day.
Oh, yeah.
They all met down by the reservoir under a big mesquite tree that's there, and this guy did a presentation showing the kids tarantulas and owls and things that he
And
brought.
snakes.
Yeah. So, and they
Wow.
loved it. They loved it. The kids were having a great time. So it was our first kind of community event down there.
That's really nice.
And the parents were also being educated as to what to do about snake bites and spider bites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he gave the name of the hospital. He says, don't go there on the weekend, don't go there, and you got to do that real quick, and this hospital is open 24 hours, etc. It was a really good educational opportunity for the
Great.
kids.
Yeah.
And he did it as like a show, it was like,
He was pretty fun.
It was
Yeah,
pretty funny.
entertaining while they learned.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a great segue into the issue. I'm hoping you could talk a little bit more about. Thanks, Ben and Victoria, for, well, not just the presentation, but all the work that you've been doing. I'm interested to learn more about where the community is in this project. I mean, if I were to walk around the San Miguel, would they see this as their project or a project they helped you with? And in what ways either the formal political leaders or others, own not just what's happened, but what you've been talking about for the next steps in the future.
That's a great question, Tom. Thank you. So being an organizer, which is what I've been for a long time, organizing a lot of campaigns, various, environmental issues and political issues. The first thing that I did is I went to the town delegata who represents the town in the city council. And I said, we have this plan that we want to do, but we need, first of all, to get your permission and the permission of the community. We don't want to do this top down. It has to be you that decides to do it. So we had our first meeting to present our proposal to the town committee, which is a group of people that work with her. And then we had a second meeting inviting the whole community and showed them the project and voted on it as a community before we even started. And then after
How do you distinguish the town committee and the whole committee?
it was
You're talking about San Miguel as a bigger area, or?
well, no, this is just the village.
Uh-huh.
Just of it. This is our community is 3
Okay.
people and about 30 families. And
Okay.
everybody's cousins and uncles and aunts and grandpas and compadres, Our community is this village that we're right next door to. And it's their pond. And they had to make the decision first. Then we went to the city and to the state. And we went and we got the sort of stamp of approval from the state of Guanajuato. There's a water department, and we went to the Collier and told them we were doing it, and had a meeting between the Collier and the delegata representing the town. And so we did the whole thing bottom up. And then we had 3 meetings, as I said, in the middle of town. And by the way, in the first meeting, the town's divided by Democrats and Republicans. In this case, it's PAN and PRI mostly. And they basically stood on other sides of the street from each other, while we stood in the middle and tried to face the map of what we were planning to do to both sides of the street. That was the first meeting. The second meeting, they all stood in a circle around us together. Third meeting, we had down by the pond, by the reservoir. And they all came down and they brought their kids and their husbands. By the way, it's mostly women that come to these meetings. And so by the time we actually asked for volunteers, we had, about 30 people from the village show up, old people, young people,
To plant trees.
to plant trees.
And
And
it-
the first thing they did is we built a canal to run the water around the big hill of dirt so it wouldn't erode it. So we had to build a canal and to go down to feed the reservoir, and they had to put rocks in that canal to keep it from eroding and turning into a major road. So they came out and rolled stones into that and built little terraces. And then they helped to plant the trees later.
But we don't own this pond.
We don't own this project.
We don't own the project. Yeah, we're facilitating it.
Because that's the way you got to do community organizing.
Right. No, I assumed that, but for a shorthand, you described it in ways that wasn't as clear that as I anticipated your answer to that. Just a quick follow-up question. It doesn't sound like anytime soon you're planning to relocate. But if you were to do so, do you see the people who are ready to take this forward with the memories of what's happened? I mean, sustainability in a sense of the activism, if you will.
By relocating, do you mean to the next plane of existence in our next life?
Or going to India or the US, or I wasn't thinking so much of your
I understand.
leaving this world, but leaving Salvador Allende or Miguel.
No,
But if you weren't there, I guess that's the question. Are there people beginning to show the commitment to the project, not just to work with you, but to take it on by themselves?
well, we're training people to do what we've learned.
Okay.
So we have a staff of about 8 people that work with us, all from the local villages, from both
Okay.
villages here. And we've basically invited people to, yeah, hold on a minute. We hired an engineer who was working for an industrial park someplace, and he wasn't happy, but he was the first one in this village who went to college.
Mhm, mhm.
And he went to the engineering school here in San Miguel, to the Universidad. And we hired him from wherever he was working in the industrial park to come here and learn permaculture and represent us in the community. And it's his project. When we finally got all the dirt out of the reservoir, I had everybody applaud him for getting he said, you can thank Edgar, and Edgar's now managing the reforestation. He's managing the backhoes. He's in charge of this project. He's the face of it. Everybody knows that I'm the one that's kind of backing it with resources. But I've had long meetings with the committee and the delegata and Ecología, and I've even invited Ecología to take credit for this. So you give us 1,000 trees, you can bring the mayor and he can claim this project, but he's got to give credit to Edgar and the community for planting the trees, and to the delegata for bringing the project forward. And that's organizing. You got to empower people to do this again. So yeah, Edgar might be doing this for the next 50 years. He's only 27.
It's that well, the whole thing is really exciting, and as not just a case, but as an example for others to not copy, but be inspired by.
Yeah, I should tell you that I grew up in Israel. I was born in Israel.
Mhm.
I lived in a kibbutz back when my parents would send me to the kibbutz all the time to live with relatives. I lived in kibbutzim that had red flags at the gate, one bank account, lots of acreage of agriculture. I went back to that kibbutz when I was older. And when I was 21, I was going to move back to Israel, and I worked in the ag fields, learning how they do drip irrigations, how they, water capturing, etc., and how they sustain themselves. And they had a fish pond, and they had a chicken farm, and they had a cow herd, and they grew all their own food, made their own, yogurt, and they had a little plastics factory that did plastic molding so they could make toothbrushes and sell them. So it was a very good learning experience for me. I decided to go back to Vermont and put my roots there. I just, because the only kibbutzim I could go to had Katyusha rockets landing in the Galilee on the Lebanese border, and I didn't want to bring my wife and kids to that atmosphere. So I decided to stay in Vermont and do my organizing and work there. But essentially, this is part of a 50-year-long journey of organizing the alternative food movement and the alternative ecological movement that fights against both Monsanto and now Bayer and all that stuff. There's a lot of work yet to be done, and the ejido system here in Mexico, which is very much like kibbutz system in Israel, is a great building block for what we might do throughout Mexico. In the semi-arid region where capturing water is the essential keystone of any resurgent of small farming and sustainability models that are locally based and are not based on huge corporate agribusiness, etc., and Monsanto Roundup, and Terminator seeds,
Right.
And so that's the big picture, where are we going to be 20 years from now when there's no water left in the water table here? Because agribusiness farms are growing food throughout the valley just below us, and it's all going to ship to Whole Foods. They're growing organic food here. That's great, but it's all agribusiness now. And when Jeff Bezos bought Whole Foods, he eliminated the local farm, the buy local movement at Whole Foods. And so now he's getting organic vegetables shipped from San Miguel, to Whole Foods. And that's what we're fighting. And that's 80% of the water table's going. There is, about 10-15% of it going to the, explosive development in town. And that's contributed to the sewage going into the Presa Allende. But all these you got to look at is, how do you develop resource management in a way that's sustainable, renewable, and thinks about, the seventh generation down the line. That's all. That's basically the idea of tikkun. Tikkun olam means to repair the earth. That's our project. Does that answer you?
We have a related question from a YouTube viewer.
Sure.
Doug Morris. He's asking for advice for folks in the U.S. who might want to start a community organic garden.
In the States?
In the States, yeah.
Sure. Doug, the first thing is, you have to look at your local resources, what kind of soil you have, how much soil you have, what the water possibilities are of watering it. Who are you growing it for is the first question. For yourselves or for the community, or do you want to start a farm and sell to a farmer's market or to local stores or restaurants? There's all kinds of, issues you have to resolve from the beginning of the process of, where are you growing, what are you growing, to what are you going to do with the final product? And how do you make that sustainable by looking at how to regenerate the soil? So for example, we have worm farms here. We bought a kilo of worms 10 years ago. It's now, making about 100 pounds of compost rich in nutrients from the worms eating all of our waste, all of our vegetables and farm waste. And we also make worm tea that we water our gardens with. So we put organic fertilizer, produced by worms. So can you build a worm farm at your site to regenerate the soil and build nutrient value? You can plant some crops that are nitrogen fixing if there's a low nitrogen content in the soil. So that's beans mostly, and legumes, chickpeas. Okay. Here in the campo, you can plant, mesquite trees because they're legumes also, and they fix nitrogen. But wherever possible, you want to look at the nutritional value of your soil and build it and grow, on compost. You can just create beds above the soil and plant things in the beds. And that's where permaculture systems really shine, where you are basically bringing in sawdust or, compost from the forest, bringing in leaves, wherever you can find compost, you bring it in and you build the soil up. And instead of having 6 inches of soil or a foot of soil, you might, 5 years later have 2 feet of soil, and that's the building of the sustainability. That's the best advice I can have to you. And use drip irrigation systems, a pipe that, if you're paying for water, you want to capture it if you can, if you have enough space to build a retention pond. And then you want to build a drip irrigation that feeds your crop at night instead of during the day. If you're in a hot area, you don't want to irrigate during the day. You don't want to spray it in the air. You want to have a drip irrigation that's turned on in the evening that waters your garden with drip irrigation all night long. So you use 50 liters of water instead of 500 liters of water. And if you mulch around your plants, you then retain that water throughout the next day. So mulching, drip irrigation, building the soils, retaining water, being as efficient as you possibly can with water and building the soil, that's the best advice I can have for you. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I have a question also. Excavating that reservoir and all of the equipment that was involved in doing that must have been pretty expensive. How was it financed?
So Victoria and I built an organization in the States that for 10 years, its job was to get rid of all the voting machines that had no paper ballots and to push the idea that you can't audit a voting machine. It's a cybersecurity impossibility. You don't know who programmed that voting machine. You don't know, who took the information out or how it was transmitted. You don't know who got into it in the interim between the time it was programmed. And, we had cybersecurity experts, by the dozens telling us that the only way you could verify any democratic elections is to have a paper ballot, to have as strong a link to secure that ballot in the chain of control, and to be able to audit it manually. And that's what we promoted for 10 years. We started off doing that in 2011. And in 2020, we had helped with a building coalition of both, people from the Freedom Works Tea Party to Grover Norquist to Common Cause we had people on the left and right. Victoria wrote grant proposals, and those grant proposals got us staffers. We hired staffers mostly from the committees of Congress, people who worked in Congress and wanted to leave Congress. Aides to John Conyers on the Judiciary Committee were some of our main staffers. And we built a coalition that basically got Congress to allocate something like $1.2 billion to the states to upgrade their voting systems, to eliminate voting systems that did not have a ballot paper trail. The country was at 30% voting machines without a paper trail in 2011. It was down to about 5% in 2020. And we focused most of the changes on states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, Pennsylvania, etc. The 12 states that were basically purple states, where those machines could make a difference in an election in just one county. And so in 2020, finally, Georgia had voting machines that all had a paper trail and could be audited. And that's what Raffensperger did in 2020 when a certain ex-president called him and wanted 11,000 votes. And he did 3 manual hand-counted audits and was able, and the same thing happened in Arizona, and the same thing happened in Pennsylvania, and the same thing happened in Michigan. And then our last work was to raise $3 million from the private industry and distribute PPE, masks, hand cleaner, face masks, plastic shields for precincts, and about 70 ballot boxes, remote ballot boxes, where you could drop your ballot in Atlanta, Georgia, Miami, St. Louis, Missouri, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Detroit. And we distributed $3 million worth of this PPE and ballot boxes. And our final phase was in Georgia for the Senate campaign. And then we basically started phasing ourselves out. But we raised $4 million for staffing and for the work, and we paid ourselves decent salaries. We worked for a couple of years for free. Then we made $10,000, then we made 30, and then we made 70 by the time we were finished. And since we don't pay rent, we grow our own food, we don't have an electric bill, and we have all the chickens and fish and eggs we can want, we basically put most of the salary into the food bank and building this system that we're working on, this project we're working on. So that's where it came from. That my mom also died 2 years ago at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. She was in a nursing home in New Rochelle, New York, which was the epicenter of the pandemic in New York State.
Mhm.
And we don't know exactly why she died, but several people died who came to her funeral of COVID. And I took a plane back to Mexico and went into quarantine for the next 3 weeks after I got back. And luckily I wasn't infected, but I took that very seriously. That's when we started planning for the food bank, and we were expecting an economic collapse. We were expecting the apocalypse. And so some of the money that my mom inherited from my mom and dad, they left us some money. They both got a lot of reparations from Germany for having been in the concentration camps in Buchenwald during the war. And so they got reparations, and they put it all into account for me and my sister. And that went to building most of that went into building a wall around the property to keep out the chapulines and towards the food bank. So that's how we finance this.
Interesting.
Okay. Oh, very interesting.
In case you didn't notice it, I'm not a capitalist. I consider myself a kibbutznik. And I don't associate with the far right or the far left at this point. As far as I'm concerned, I'm an independent, and Victoria is the same way. We'll work with anybody that's interested in, being in service to their community. I don't care what your political stripes are. But I used to be, pretty heavy far left anti-war activist and alternative activist. But, I'm 73 now. I'm less ideological and more practical. But I still think capitalism is a failed system. And we're facing fascism, a heavy wave of fascism. You can go to our website, stopfascismnow.org, to see the last project we did, as far as politics is concerned, before we transitioned completely into doing this work locally. Basically, both Victoria and I have decided to think globally, but act locally, and stop working in Washington and, lobbying state capitals and working on, trying to influence what's going on in the United States. It's a lost cause. That empire is sinking as far as I'm concerned. The only question is, would I prefer the empire of China or the empire of Russia to replace it?
Right.
We're back to imperialism and capitalism. So, like I said, kibbutzim, that's the answer.
Well, I want to thank.
I would like to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We have a question here. From
Who's that been lurking in the background there?
I need the camera. Could you lend me the?
There he is.
Hey, we've met before. What's your name?
Roberto. Well, my name is Roberto. I work for the Center for Global Justice. And well, I must congratulate you, Ben. It's a magnificent work you're working on. And my question is related to the Spanish-speaking community. I would like to know if through Edgar, who is the face, you told us the face for the project for many people, are you planning, or do you already have a Spanish presentation, Spanish documentation of the work you're doing, because I think it could be very, very nice, very useful to have it and to present. For instance, we as Educación Colaborativa work with the students of UTSMA, Universidad Tecnológica de San Miguel de Allende, and they have the agriculture. One of the careers they offer is agriculture. So it could be very, very useful to have an actual example of what that can be done with spirit, with ideas, with very clear ideas. So that would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a really good question. And I will be the first to confess that my Spanish is not that good. Hebrew is my first language, and English was bad enough for me to learn. I think I've almost mastered English, and Spanish, I think I drank too much tequila and didn't study enough of my Spanish. But Edgar, who studied in the university, and a young woman named Vanessa, who's joining us, she went back to the States. She was helping plant trees the last couple of weeks, but she went back to the States to get her stuff, and she's moving into Tikkun. And she studied Spanish literature in Chile for a number of years, and she's a wonderful poet and a writer in Spanish. And she's going to be the one that's translating everything. Our current website, to answer you, is translated to Spanish. If you go to ticunsanmiguel.mx, you'll see that it's in English and in Spanish. We have not updated this project to Spanish because we've been just working 7 days a week on it since May. And we just haven't had the time to stop and reload it into Spanish. So this project itself is about to be, it just got translated and we have to check it. And then we're going to send it to you in Spanish so you can, and put it on our website so you can see it. But the real work that we see being done will be by people who are in this community, who are Spanish speaking, born in San Miguel, hopefully, or in Mexico, who will continue this project going forward. I'm 73. This project has got to be around for the next 50 years. If God willing, the planet is still, in some sort of, homeostasis where it's not getting worse. We've already done the damage of climate change. We're reaping the harvest right now with, hurricanes like the one that just hit Florida, with temperatures around the world running into the 40s or into the hundreds. And Sacramento was 117 when I called my treasurer, who lives in Sacramento. We have a 501c3 in California, and this Tikkun is an AC. I don't own Tikkun. I own the pickup truck that's parked in front of the house. Everything, all the trees we planted, everything we did here is part of the San Miguel Center for Ecological and Economic Sustainability, AC. So in order to maintain this project, it doesn't belong to me and it won't belong to my kids. They're welcome to come here and live here and build their own house. If they work here, we could give them a lease and they could have their own private house, like what is called a moshav in Israel, where you have your own private property and everything else is collected. So, but this is an assay. And I intended it that way. Victoria, who's much younger than I am, has a house that she built, and she's got a 50-year lease, which is about what she figures she's going to be alive, so she will, have her own house that she paid for out of her salary, and her art studio. She's an artist and a gardener. And so she's got a lease of like a 5% portion of this property. And if anybody else wants to come and invest in building a house, we'll give them a 55-year lease, but they won't own the land. Sort of like the way the Mexican government does it within a couple of 100 meters of the beach. And they used to do in San Miguel, you had to get a 100-year lease to buy a piece of property. So that's the nature of the land ownership here and the assets that we've put into this project. But I hope that answered your question. Was it Tomas?
Roberto.
Roberto, I'm sorry. Roberto, I hope that answered your question. I tend to wander into different topics as I talk in my old age. I have a little bit of ADD. So, Roberto, did that answer you?
Yeah. Well, yes, an initial, let's say, base to build upon. I'm gonna get close to you to find out what can we do together.
Please come out here and visit us and bring Cliff with you. He's seen the reservoir, but he hasn't come up to the Tikkun. By the way, in 2 weeks, the head of ecology here, the engineer, Julio, who is also a professor at UNAM, is bringing 45 students to camp here and do a workshop at Tikkun with me and Victoria, teaching them and showing them what we do here. You know, we're off the grid. We have all solar panels and wind generator powering everything we do here. And we have, you know, all of our ponds and rainwater collection and greenhouses made out of adobe and everything like that. So we'll give you a tour. We've given a couple of hundred people a tour over here already since COVID opened up, since the COVID pandemic stopped. And we intend to continue doing that. Before the COVID, Collier was bringing their summer kids here to learn about farming, and we have them plant seeds and then come back and harvest the seeds and take them home to their parents, harvest whatever they grew. So we intend to do that. We intend to do a lot of classes for the local school kids and to bring in kids from outside. This is a teaching center. That's what this project is meant to be. And we even created a site where there's room for about 30 tents so that people could come and camp out. And we intend to do little projects building an adobe chica casita for people to learn how to build with adobe. And those casitas will be places where teachers or residents, you know, farming, you know, students could live and work with us. So eventually this will be a kibbutz. The kibbutz, I lived in kibbutz Sarid in the Galil, was just below Nazareth, where Jesus lived. Jesus of Nazareth, just below Nazareth, in what used to be a swamp below the village of Nazareth that was full of mosquitoes and malaria. A Jewish kibbutz group came from Germany. They were German Jews in the 1920s, and they bought the land, which was very cheap because there was a swamp, and they drained it and built a pond, and they put in fish, and they built an irrigation system. And when I got there, there was 300 people living with one bank account. And they were all working at some job. Some people worked in the chicken, some people worked in the fields, some people worked, you know, in the factory, some people milked the cows, you know, and everybody had a job. And every morning I had to get up at 6 o'clock, and they took us in a wagon behind the tractor to the fields, and I would push irrigation. They couldn't afford to irrigate all the fields, so they had these mobile irrigation system on wheels, big long aluminum pipes with wheels on them. And my job was to drive on this tiny little tractor and pull the pipes from one field to the other. My job, at night they would irrigate. My job would be to go there in the morning, disconnect the pipes and move them to another field on their wheels. So I'd drive back and forth and reconnect them to the next field where there was valves. And then at night they'd turn them on. And I just recently went back to that kibbutz with Victoria, and it turned out that they had changed a lot since their first days. The kids all left. They went to college. They got jobs. They bought houses in Tel Aviv. They were working in the tech industry. They were like making $200,000 a year doing computer programming or, tech starts of a new app or whatever. Israel turned into a technological center. So they made it so that the kids could come back and could buy a piece of land. So they built their own equity, as long as they, promised that they would sell it to someone that the kibbutz approved of. So they're bringing back the grandchildren that way to live on the kibbutz. And so they designated one section of the kibbutz to be private housing, so that, the kids could come back and the grandkids could come back. It was very interesting. Things have changed drastically over the years. The whole kibbutz system has shrunk. The moshav, which is more of a cooperative where everybody has their own house in the periphery of the moshav, and then in the center is the communal, collectively owned enterprise, which farms and has products and owns equipment and does all the work and maybe has staff. That's all collectively owned, and everybody has their own private residency, which is sort of what everybody's going to there in Israel. Kibbutz is more like a commune, a moshav is a cooperative. Anyway, so that's pretty much, I hope, answers all your questions. If anybody has any more questions, Cliff has got my email. If you want to put together, Cliff, a visit here with folks from the Global Justice Center. As you remember, I used to be an active member. I used to help you do your auctions, and I was good friends with Bob and with I forget her name.
Betsy.
Nancy. It was Nancy. I was going to say
Betsy.
Betsy. I was going to say Nancy. I figured that was wrong. I forget all the people's names I knew before COVID. But anyway, it would be you're more than welcome to put together a group to come and visit us. And we basically have groups coming in just about every week at this point. And we're going to go wholesale into having conferences and classes. Sometimes in October or early November, we'll have a conference about this project that we just presented to you and Tikkun, and we'll invite people, and we'll have, workshops. We'll have like a 2-day conference and workshops on, permaculture, workshops on green building and renewable energy, workshops on water catchment systems, workshops on farming, organic farming, worm composting, etc. So that we can, we have a whole lot we can share at this point after 10 years of building this project, and we're more than happy to do that. That's our job. That's what we feel this center is here for, as a teaching center.
Well, this project and the other projects that you have done over the years are very impressive. And I want to thank you and Victoria for your service and for the interesting presentation today. I should tell people that this program, as well as previous programs, are available on our website at www.globaljusticecenter.org. And I hope you'll join us again next Monday when we will hear from economist Doug Henwood, who will be talking about inflation. And so please join us again then as well. And finally, thanks to our webinar team, Roberto Robles, Gregory Diamond, Liz Mestris, Livia Canellis, Bob Stone, Betsy Bowman, and myself. And now this is Cliff Durand signing off until next Monday.
Thanks for inviting us, Cliff. I appreciate the opportunity.
You, Cliff.